Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Blunting Occam's Razor. In this video, we're going to be looking at bootstrapping simplicity, a priori justifications for Occam's Razor. Now, there have been a range of different attempts to justify Occam's razor with varying degrees of success. Several attempted to do this with reference to the empirical or statistical results of the razor. However, in this video, we're going to cover the methods that attempted to prove Occam's razor a priori, before experience. Essentially, that this principle is something on par with the laws of logic that we can accept and understand independent of our experience of the world. And then in future videos, we're going to look at some of the empirical or statistical justifications for it. So we could broadly group these theories into three categories: theological justifications, basic fact justifications, and justifications based on other principles of rationality. The theological justification is in some ways the most convincing, in that, if you accept the underlying theological claims, the principle of simplicity follows, though those underlying theological claims are hardly justified. The other two largely amount to insisting that the principle is inherently true, as a foundationalist might insist on some foundational epistemic belief is true with no evidence, or insisting, as a coherentist might, that it is justified by some other equally unjustified epistemic set of maxims. These two fall into the issues of Agrippa's trilemma, and we'll cover each justification and the concerns with it in turn. So, first off, let's start with the theological justifications. So, Occam's razor comes from the Middle Ages. And medieval and early modern philosophers often justified principles such as Occam's razor with reference to a theological framework, as was common in these times. A particularly relevant justification comes from Leibniz. Leibniz argued that God created the best of all possible worlds in response to the problem of evil and questions around the paradox of omnipotence. Check out our videos on Leibniz for more on that. In the best of all possible worlds, it makes sense that things behave in ways that are as simple and easy to understand as possible, because the world would be worse off if they were more complicated without reason. Therefore, we can justify the claim that nothing is any more complicated than it needs to be, because otherwise, this would not be the best of all possible worlds. This is the closest we get to justifying a connection between simplicity and truth in a real, rigorous way. However, as noted, the theological link here is stronger than some of the other justifications, but the underlying justification for theism, particularly Leibniz's flavor, is quite challenging. We might level any number of objections that the real world doesn't seem to be the best of all possible worlds, etc. against this, but check out my video on philosophical optimism for more on Leibniz's argument and some of the problems with it. However, even within a theistic framework, we might be concerned with such a claim. It seems that a deity would have many competing priorities in making the best of all possible worlds. Surely there might be situations where making something a bit more complicated would reduce suffering, for example, even if there didn't appear to be any reason to make it more complicated. For example, changing the way that the wind currents work to make them behave unpredictably and not necessarily follow a set of rules, but in doing so you prevent hurricanes that kill hundreds of thousands of people. So, there's reason to think that simple theories might not actually always be right given other priorities. If God is prioritizing simplicity over happiness, the problem of evil seems to reappear. Other more recent philosophers have tried to claim that Occam's razor is a foundational principle of epistemology, that it is a basic fact, true at face value. This runs into all of the problems of foundationalist theories of justification that we've mentioned elsewhere, but it's particularly challenging given that the razor is so poorly defined. Some champion a better defined version of this called the laser, Occam's razor, which claims that you should minimize only fundamental entities, though others argue that such a version doesn't really map onto the real use or requirements of Occam's razor in scientific practice, as many scientific theories are not concerned with only fundamental entities, but actually with higher order natural kinds. And even if you can define this, this faces all of the problems of foundationalism, of the question of why are we assuming this as opposed to something else. It doesn't seem prima facie true to me as a skeptic, and as just assuming that it's true seems to beg the question against me, the skeptic. And all of the arguments we're going to have in the rest of this series that show not only is it not prima facie true, but it leads to all sorts of contradictions and problems. And so there's some deep problems with just saying, oh, we couldn't find a justification for this, so we're going to assume it at face value. Some argue that rather than being inherently true, simplicity is intrinsically valuable in some way. Some in this category lump simplicity in with rationality, arguing that no argument can be made for the truth of either, but there's something to be valued in an ethical sense. Others take simplicity as a matter of aesthetic preference, as Quine framed it, arguing that a theory that does not prioritize simplicity, quote, offends the aesthetic sense of us who have a taste for desert landscapes. Now, some challenges to this include that it's hard to see what independent value simplicity has. We've defended rationality here on the channel in that it makes it possible to settle otherwise irreconcilable disagreements. While simplicity makes the promise of being able to provide guidance between otherwise underdetermined possibilities, as we've seen in this series, that payout is remarkably hard to define or cash out, and the wide range of possible ways to do so defeat the purpose of a universal epistemic tool, since there's no real agreement on what simplicity really is. Not to mention there are all sorts of other epistemic maxims we could use in the place of simplicity that are at least equally prima facie justified or intrinsically valuable. And so if our only intrinsic value of it is that it allows us to deal with the problem of underdetermination, there's lots of other ways we could do that if we're just allowed to assume whatever we want without any justification. And so it's hard to see why simplicity would be beneficial. And it's hard, even if we got to simplicity being beneficial, more beneficial than the other kinds of epistemic maxims, why a particular version of the many different types of parsimony and elegance and quantitative and qualitative parsimony and different kinds of elegance that we looked at in the last video would be particularly preferable or justifiable in any way beyond this is the one we decided to assume. Finally, some philosophers argue that some version of Occam's razor is justifiable in reference to other fundamental principles of epistemic inquiry or a particular goal. For example, if we have a goal of a theory of everything, some kind of unification of all theories, we might take simplicity as an instrumentally valuable principle in the service of this broader goal. However, this seems to be doing things out of order and putting the cart before the horse, as the goal of science is truth, not picking and choosing intermediate epistemic frameworks that will pick our favorite theory out of otherwise underdetermined theories. It's possible that there isn't one grand unifying theory that's going to explain all of the forces of physics. It's possible that that doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, then picking some intermediate epistemic principle that's going to try to point us in that direction may actually lead us astray. It may lead us away from truth, which is exactly the opposite of what we want to be doing. And so we want to be picking epistemic frameworks that will point us towards truth, not picking an epistemic framework because we like it, because simplicity is easier to understand, or because we think it will point us in the direction of the theory we've already assumed to be true but have never proven. What do you think? Is there an a priori justification for Occam's razor, or is this something that's better justified with empirical evidence or statistics? Are any of the arguments here convincing, and if so, which ones? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org. Subscribe, hit the notification bell if you like this video. You want to see more, want to make sure you catch the rest of this series on simplicity and Occam's razor, and stay skeptical, everybody.